If you've walked around Montreal lately, I mean, or really any major city skyline in early 2026, you've probably had to crane your neck, literally.
Absolutely, because the cranes are everywhere.
They are. They're these massive steel skeletons just defining the horizon. And for the last, 20 years, when you saw a crane, you knew exactly what it meant.
It was a distinct signal. It meant condos.
Condos.
It meant someone was building a glass box in the sky to sell to a young professional or, maybe an overseas investor looking for a place to park some cash.
Exactly. But here's the twist, and it's a massive one. If you look at those same cranes in February 2026, they're building something completely different. We're witnessing a structural metamorphosis of the city.
We really are.
The era of the condo king is effectively pausing, and we're entering what our sources are calling the all-rental era.
It's a fascinating pivot, and I want to be clear here. We aren't just seeing a slight uptick in apartments. We're seeing developers, huge corporate entities that have spent decades perfecting the art of the sell, suddenly abandoning that model.
Just leaving it behind.
In favor of keeping the keys.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the report, The Coming of the Rental Age, which pulls data from wikiresidence.ca and infodrone.ca. Our mission is to figure out why this is happening, why the sudden shift. We're going to look at the specific economic forces driving this, the new players involved, and most importantly, what the shift from homeowner to renter for life actually means for you.
Because this isn't just about buildings, right? It's a shift that changes the fundamental relationship between a city and the people who live in it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because on the surface, it feels completely counterintuitive. I always thought the golden rule of real estate development was speed. You build it, you sell the units, you get your cash, and you move on.
Get out, get paid, yeah.
Why would these developers suddenly want to become landlords? Why hold on to the building? That seems like a headache.
That is the billion-dollar question. To understand this, we have to look at the financial equation that developers are staring at right now. The math has completely changed. It's no longer about a quick exit. It's about the long game.
Okay, walk us through the math. What changed?
So it starts with the interest rates. We've seen mortgage rates stabilize, right, around 4.5 to 5%.
Which doesn't sound that high historically,
But for an individual buyer, after a decade of near zero rates, it's a psychological and financial wall.
Right. We got used to essentially free money.
Exactly. If you're looking at a $500,000 condo, the difference between a 2% rate and a 5% rate is hundreds of dollars a month.
It just erodes your buying power.
Completely. So the pre-sales for condos, those early deposits that developers use to fund construction,
The ones they need to get the loan in the first place.
have dried up. If you can't sell the units on paper before you break ground, the old model just breaks.
So the customers disappeared. But that doesn't explain why they'd switch to rental. Why not just, stop building?
Because the other side of the equation became incredibly lucrative. Think of it this way. The old model was hunting.
Hunting.
You kill the mammoth, the condo tower, you sell the meat, you eat once, and then you have to go hunt again.
Okay, I like that image.
The new model is farming. You plant the tower, and you harvest the rent every single month forever. And right now, the harvest is worth more than the meat.
Farming versus hunting. But is the harvest really that good?
It's better than good. Previously, a developer operated on a margin model. You sell the building out, you make a one-time profit margin of maybe 15 to 20%, and you're done.
Right.
But now, studies like a recent one from Iris that's in our source material show that the long-term profitability of rental buildings in Montreal is hitting peaks of 11 to 14%.
14% really.
It transforms the building from a product you sell into an income-generating asset. It's like buying a bond that pays you 14% interest, except the bond is made of concrete and glass.
That's a massive return. So instead of a quick cash injection, it's this steady, reliable stream of revenue.
Precisely. And there's a second wind pushing this, which is tax incentives.
Oh, right.
Both the federal and provincial governments recently abolished the GST and QST on new rental construction.
I remember seeing headlines about that. But does knocking off a sales tax really make that big a difference to a developer building a skyscraper?
A massive difference. Think about how razor-thin margins can be in construction. This tax cut reduces the total project cost by about 5%.
Okay.
Now, 5% might sound small, but on a 100-unit building, we're talking about millions of dollars, roughly $2 to $3 million in direct savings.
So if your profit margin was going to be 10%, and the government just handed you 5% of the cost back. They've just increased your potential profit by 50%.
You got it. Exactly. That tips the scale from maybe viable to highly profitable. The government is effectively subsidizing this shift to get more housing built.
Okay, so the developers become farmers. They hold the buildings.
Mm.
But do they keep them forever? I can't imagine a construction company wanting to manage unclogging toilets for 30 years.
You're right, they don't. And that's the clever exit strategy. They aren't necessarily aiming to be your landlord for life. Once they fill that tower, and we're seeing 98% occupancy rates, they have what's called a stabilized asset.
It's a proven money printer.
Exactly. And then they sell that entire occupied tower to a pension fund or a real estate investment trust, a REIT, at record prices.
So they aren't selling units to people anymore. They're selling the whole revenue stream to Wall Street or Bay Street.
Precisely. It's a financial product now. It's much lower risk than hoping 300 individual people get approved for their mortgages.
That makes a lot of sense. So this isn't just a theory or some, economic forecast. We're seeing big players actually changing their entire business models on the ground, right?
We are. And looking at the specific faces of this change really illustrates how deep it goes. Take the Quorum Group, for example. Historically, they were a condo builder. If you bought a condo in the last 10 years, there's a decent chance they built it.
They were the hunters.
They were the hunters. And now they've pivoted. Look at Project Dahlia in Saint Laurent. This is a 249-unit complex. It was initially designed for sale.
For sale.
They had the plans, the marketing, the sales office, everything. And then they flipped it to rental.
That's a huge U-turn. It's like a car manufacturer suddenly deciding not to sell cars, but to run a taxi fleet instead.
It is. They realized the market had shifted. They're targeting professionals who want that new build comfort, the quartz countertops, the gym, the pool, sure, but who don't want or simply can't get the mortgage.
It's the condo lifestyle without the condo ownership.
Exactly. Then you have Project GONN in Pierrefonds. This is a transit-oriented development, a 2D. The strategy there is just maximizing land value through a constant rent flow because it's right next to transit. It's a long-term play.
Right. And it's not just the suburbs. I saw Rachel Julian mentioned in the notes, they're huge in the East End.
Oh, yeah. Rachel Julian is revitalizing the East, specifically Hochelaga. They have Project Kenui.
Kenui.
This is a massive undertaking. The total plan is for 928 units. Phase 1 alone is 210. And again, this is high density dedicated to rental. They're betting on the shortage in that gentrifying area.
928 units is practically a small village.
It really is. And then at the very high end, you have Omnia Technologies. They're doing something interesting with a project called Elie Balt in the Quartier de Spectacle. It's 131 units, but they market them as smart rentals with integrated services.
Smart rentals. That sounds like marketing speak. What does that actually mean?
Think of it as a service. You aren't just renting 4 walls. You're renting a lifestyle. Concierge, app-based management, all the amenities. The takeaway here for you is that these aren't the dusty apartment blocks of the 1980s with the squeaky floors.
Right.
These are luxury complexes where tenants are viewed as clients.
Clients instead of tenants. That's a shift in language for sure. But let's talk about these clients. Because if everything being built is a luxury complex with smart apps and quartz counters, what does that mean for the average person trying to live in the city?
That is the core tension.
Because it sounds great for the developers, they get tax breaks, they get steady income, but we're talking about a potential society of renters. Is it a society that can actually afford the rent?
Well, the barrier to ownership has become incredibly high. The median single-family home is hovering around $800,000.
Wow.
Even a median condo is about $470,000. For a lot of people, the door to ownership is just welded shut.
So you have to rent. But renting isn't exactly cheap either.
No, and there is a specific data point from our source that I think will stick with people. It's called the transfer price shock.
Oh, I saw this. This is painful.
It is devastating. If you're a tenant living in an older apartment, maybe something you've been in for 5 or 6 years,
Right.
and you have to move, maybe for a job or a new baby, moving into a new 4.5, that's a 2-bedroom for our non-Quebec listeners, implies a price jump of roughly $600 to $700 per month.
Whoa, wait. $700 net. That isn't just a price jump. That's a car payment. That's groceries for a family. For most people, that's an eviction notice. If you're on a fixed income, where do you find an extra $8,000 a year just to keep a roof over your head?
You don't. That's the problem. Just to maintain the same size of living space, you are bleeding money. And if we look at the market stats for December 2025, the average rent for a stabilized new two-bedroom is around
And
$2,260.
people are paying it.
They have to. The vacancy rate for recent builds is critically low, between 1.3 and 1.5%. Demand is so high that these new luxury units, despite the price, are often rented in under 30 days.
That is incredibly fast. It creates a feeling of desperation.
It does, and this creates a serious social consequence. We are seeing the rise of a renter by necessity class. This isn't the young professional choosing flexibility. This exposes families, and the data highlights single-parent households specifically to a lot of vulnerability. Repossession, rent hikes. Many are seeing over 30% or even 40% of their income just devoured by housing costs.
Which brings us to the crisis of affordability. It feels like there's a massive gap here. We have these shiny new towers renting for $2,300, but the average rent across the island, if you include the old stock, is around $1,150.
Right.
That is a Grand Canyon-sized gap.
It is, and it highlights a significant policy failure. We have to talk about the 2020 rule, or the bylaw for a diverse metropolis. The idea was that developers had to include social, affordable, and family housing in their projects.
Right. The idea was that if you build a luxury tower, you have to build some affordable units too. A sort of social contract.
That was the theory. In practice, it didn't work. The bylaw allowed developers to pay a penalty fee instead of building the units. And guess what? Most developers did the math, the farming math, and realized it was cheaper to pay the fine than to compromise their rental yield.
So they just paid to get out of it.
They did. The city collected over $66 million in fines.
But did they get the housing?
Barely. Only 189 social units were directly delivered via this regulation.
189. In a city of millions. That's negligible. That's basically a rounding error.
It's a drop in the bucket. So the private sector is building luxury, and the policy to force them to build affordable housing turned into a tax collection scheme. This is why we're seeing a pivot toward the nonprofit sector. Here in Montreal, you'll hear them called OBNLs, to act as the safety net.
Tell us about the OBNLs. Are they actually able to compete with the big guys like Quorum or Rachel Julian?
They're trying to, but it's David versus Goliath. There are about 1,650 social economy housing enterprises in Quebec now. And there's a new push, the Lodger Plus program, which provides grants of $200,000 to $600,000 to help these nonprofits professionalize.
Professionalize.
They need to be able to move fast and compete for land, which is hard when you're a nonprofit and the guy next to you has $1 billion in backing.
Is it worth the investment? I mean, from a taxpayer perspective, why should we fund this?
The economic argument is actually very strong. The data suggests that housing a person via an OBNL saves society about $7,300 per year in social costs.
In what way?
We're talking about reduced strain on healthcare, on homelessness services, policing.
So it's cheaper to house people affordably than to deal with the fallout of them not having housing.
Exactly. It's fiscally responsible compassion. And the city is trying to catch up. The 2026 Montreal budget is $7.7 billion total, and they've allocated $578 million over 10 years for housing.
Okay.
They've also set aside $3 million specifically for inspecting 1,600 buildings.
Why the inspections? Is that just red tape?
No, it's protection. To ensure that in the rush to build these rental units, quality isn't sacrificed. We don't want a shiny new tower that starts leaking in year 3.
Good point.
Because remember, if you're a renter, you can't just fix the roof yourself.
Right. So looking ahead, we're in 2026. If we look out to 2030, what's the forecast? What does the mix of new housing look like?
The forecast is stark. If we look at what will be built in the next 5 years, the lion's share, about 80 to 85%, will be private rental.
So the luxury market rate stuff we discussed.
That's the vast majority. Then about 10-12% is projected to be non-market. That's the OBNLs and co-ops we just talked about.
And condos.
Condos, the old king of the skyline. They're projected to make up only 5 to 8% of new builds.
That is a complete flipping of the script from 10 years ago. But think about what that 5% figure means. It means that in 2030, if you want to buy a home, you are fighting for scraps.
Exactly. You aren't just competing with other buyers, you're competing with scarcity itself. The property ladder we were all promised, it's missing the bottom rungs.
So for the average listener, the dream of buying that starter condo is just getting pushed further and further away.
It is. And here is the hard truth that puts all of this into perspective. To actually restore affordability, to get back to a place where rent doesn't eat 40% of your paycheck. Montreal needs to build 72,000 units per year.
72,000. And what are we hitting now?
We're plateauing at about 23,000.
Wow. So we are building less than a third of what we need.
Exactly. So the implication is clear. Even with all these cranes, even with this massive shift to rental, price pressure is going to remain strong. The supply just isn't catching up to the demand.
So let's bring it all home. We've covered the economics, the yield versus margin, the farming versus hunting. We've covered the projects from Quorum to Omnia. We've seen the social cost and the struggle of the OBNLs. What's the big picture here?
The big picture is that the market has fundamentally flipped. We're moving toward a mix where private developers dominate the volume with high-end rentals, while the nonprofit sector is frantically trying to weave a safety net underneath. The homeowner dream is being replaced by a tenant-client reality.
It really redefines what it means to live in the city. You know, it raises a provocative thought for me. If the dream of ownership is becoming a luxury for the elite, and if the city itself relies on the property taxes from these mega projects to fund its budget, are we transforming Montreal into a service economy of housing,
That's a powerful way to put it.
where citizens are permanent customers rather than owners? It feels like we are moving from a city of neighborhoods to a city of subscriptions. You subscribe to your music, you subscribe to your car service, and now you subscribe to your apartment.
It does feel that way, and
Yeah.
if you're a customer, you have different rights and different vulnerabilities than if you're an owner. An owner has equity. A subscriber just has a monthly bill.
Well, on that note, next time you walk through downtown or look out at the skyline, take a look at those cranes. They aren't just lifting steel and concrete. They're building a completely new economic reality for Montreal.
And we'll be watching to see how it settles.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.